Mistake number 3, asking for loan approval prematurely. Why is this a mistake?
In the contract, there are very few ways for the seller to actually terminate it. Most of the ways for the seller to actually terminate a contract come through the buyer. The buyer asks for changes or repairs during the inspection period. Now it becomes the seller's responsibility to answer or stay silent, and then the buyer can terminate the contract. So if the buyer is asking for $20,000 in repairs and the seller says no, well, that's sort of like the seller terminating the contract, but the buyer can still move forward if they want. There is one spot in the contract, though, that does allow the seller to terminate the contract. And in this market, you as listing agents need to be aware of it. If we look up here at line 103, upon buyer obtaining loan approval, the buyer shall promptly deliver written notice of such approval to the seller. So when the buyer has loan approval, they have to tell the seller. However, we know that that doesn't happen all the time. And we also know that buyers don't always get loan approval. So what's the next part say? If buyer is unable to obtain loan approval after the exercise of diligent effort, because if they don't use diligent effort, they're in default, right? Then at any time prior to the expiration of the loan approval period, the buyer may provide written notice to the seller stating that the buyer has been unable to obtain loan approval and has either elected to waive the loan approval period, in which event the contract will continue as if loan approval had been obtained, or terminate the contract. So if you are a diligent listing agent and you know that the loan approval period is coming up and you start asking the buyer for loan approval, you are almost ensuring that they are either going to tell you, yes, we have loan approval, or no, we don't have loan approval and we need an extension, or we're terminating the contract. So right then and there, those are 3 reasons why you don't want to ask them whether or not they have loan approval. Because if they go past the loan approval period, now the buyer's deposit is hard, with very few ways for them to get out of the contract. So if you're on the listing side, it doesn't make sense for you to keep asking them whether or not they have loan approval. And another reason why you shouldn't ask them is the next section here, which talks about when the loan approval period is deemed waived. So if the buyer fails to timely deliver either notice provided in paragraph 8B3 or 8B4 above, which is what we just discussed, meaning if they don't tell you that they have loan approval and they don't tell you that they don't have loan approval and that they're waiving it or terminating the contract. So if the buyer is silent, then the loan approval period shall be deemed waived, in which event the contract will continue as if loan approval has been obtained, provided, however, the seller may elect to terminate this contract. So if the buyer is silent and they go past their loan approval period, now the seller has options. They have the option to terminate the contract, which is the only spot of the contract they actually have that option. In this market, where you have a contract and you know the buyer does not have loan approval, you might be sitting on a cash offer that's very similar to this. You may have had correspondences with the buyer's lender that don't give you confidence that they're going to be able to close, or maybe they're going to ask for an extension or something like that. It might be in your seller's best interest to cancel the contract and go with the cash offer. So you want to be able to give them that option. But if you repeatedly hound the buyer for loan approval, you're now putting them on notice that they have to give you some sort of answer, which they don't have to. So to recap on that, if the buyer goes past their loan approval, their deposit is basically hard. So that's one reason not to ask for loan approval from the buyer until after the loan approval period ends. And then the other reason is that the seller may have a better offer and may want to terminate the contract. So if you're on the buyer's side, you want to make sure that you're giving some sort of answer. Yes, we have loan approval, if you actually have loan approval. No, we do not have loan approval, but we're waiving it. Or no, we do not have loan approval, we're terminating the contract. And then from the seller side, if the buyer hasn't done anything. Maybe you can renegotiate better terms. Maybe you've gotten better offers since you entered the contract, and you threaten that you're going to terminate the contract unless the buyer raises the purchase price. You can do that.